All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Here we have a drone shot from Gabriel Moroni. Thanks for sharing this with us, Gabriel. And let's go ahead and get into this presentation and discussion. So real briefly, I want to thank everybody for coming and briefly touch on this idea of teamwork. I've been on a lot of teams in my life, and inevitably, it works best if you recognize that everybody has different perspectives coming at this, but if we have a shared goal, we'll be a lot more successful. And so everybody here in this room is, I'm assuming, is passionate about the mill site, passionate about the future of Fort Bragg. You know, we'll have our differences of opinion, but working together as a team, I think we're going to be that much more successful as a community. And, you know, the bullet here about respect is just probably not necessary, but I wanted to just at least throw it out there just to make sure that everybody respects all the different opinions, both on the discussion that we're going to have as well as from everybody up here, and you know, that we're civil. And if you're not, I'm going to have to pull up the City Council's rules of civility on you, so that's my threat. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to give this slide presentation, which is clocked at about 45 minutes or so, and have a time for questions, answers, and discussion, have a brief closing statement, and then take a break no later than 8 o'clock. You know, if we're still burning in discussion, we will go ahead and after the break pick up on more Q&A, but most likely we will be ready for that aspects to be over, and I'm offering to give a demonstration of the mapping platform, which I'm going to briefly show in the presentation, which is one of the resources that we're bringing to the community. And we have a variety of additional slides as appendices that, you know, can go into further detail on some of the things I touch on. And then again, we might be done at 8:15 and ready to go home, so we'll play that by ear. I am feeling optimistic about it, though. And so jumping into it, before we were live, we were asked about how we came together and what we're about. This slide is from our webpage at Fort Bragg Headlands Consortium.org, and we're a science-based group of organizations and individuals, and we're really trying to bring our expertise to the table and help out with the dialogue. So our current membership is, as I mentioned, it's composed of organizations and individuals. We are, as a definition of a consortium, we are not like one unified voice, but overall, on the overall mission, and you know, we are all in consensus, but some of the details we sometimes disagree on. But so any one organization or any one individual doesn't represent the whole consortium. So the two organizations are Conservation Biology Institute and the Noyo Headlands Unified Design Group. There's a lot that could be said. George briefly introduced Nudge, as it's known. And Nudge has been a real force in the community, really starting this idea forward of bringing science and information and facts, and as well as a real strong eye towards what's going on. So thanks to George for doing that for all these years and continuing it on. It was great to get a Nudge email about this week, so that was very heartening. As you know, Nudge is now virtual. The downtown office is closed, but the organization still is moving forward. Talk to George about that if you have questions. Conservation Biology Institute is the organization that I'm from. Our headquarters are in Oregon, in Corvallis. We've been around since 1997. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and with a very similar mission of providing science and information to people that are navigating this world of trying to figure out what to conserve, what to develop, and you know, how to do things wisely. I will get a little bit more into some of the things that we do at CBI later on in the organization. Suffice to say that we're 35 people strong, and we have a variety of people working remotely as well as at headquarters. The individuals in the organization are listed here on the right-hand side. I'm supposed to try and whiz through my whole introduction really fast, so I'm not going to read every word on here. We will post the presentation afterwards so you can access all of these slides later. And we're going to have brief introductions to the people in the room as we come up to their speaking spots. So for this 45-minute presentation, maybe 42 from now, I'm giving the introduction. I'm going to pass things over to Bill, who's going to hit on the theme of the economic goal in our platform, I guess you can call it, our page of principles and goals. Leslie's going to focus more on the ecological integrity aspect, George more on the adaptation aspect, and me more on the smart growth or wise growth aspect. I should point out that hopefully you all have seen there's a one-page flyer that's going around that has our goals, our social goals, our guiding principles and objectives on it, and encourage you all to take one of those. It's one of the things that we're providing as a hopeful framework. So a quick history, we briefly went into it in the intro. In 2002, the mill closed. 2006, Koch Industries buys GP. Around 2013, GP loses the lawsuit against the city about the cleanup of Mill Pond 8 and is required to pay for a full cleanup. Also around that time, the whole planning effort stalled or fell apart, however you want to talk to, whoever you talk to. We decided as a community in 2014, after a lot of discussion, to rather than start up a whole site planning process, a specific plan process, which is time-consuming and expensive, to do the shortcut of the local coastal plan amendment process. And so here we are 5 years later. We are making some pretty big decisions as a community. The Fort Bragg City Council's meeting on Saturday the 21st, and we encourage everybody here to go or to write emails. And your voice is very important, and we'll note and get back into it that GP is still trying to redefine what a full cleanup is in various ways, above the board and below the board, and they are selling portions of the site. So tonight we're going to lay out a framework that I mentioned, that handout, and we'll touch on it a little bit more here. We're going to propose, make a proposal for the amendment, and provide some action items to move the cleanup process forward. The proposal in a nutshell, I went back and forth on this. Some people say, keep the audience in suspense, and other people say what you're going to say in the beginning and come back to it at the end. So I landed on the latter, and so in a nutshell, we feel it's really, really important to get development going in portions of the mill site, to start acting now and move that forward. But also to recognize that there's a lot of area on the mill site, or the old mill site, the Headlands, that we're pretty certain about as a community about what we want to do, and there's some areas that we're really, really uncertain about. And so one of our big points today is to resolve those uncertain areas later. And this was one, we'll touch back on that theme, but basically it was the original genesis way back in 2014 when the mayor presented this idea. It was Mayor Turner, and what it was is let's develop the areas where we know we want to develop and save the areas for later when we know better what we want to do. That became the urban reserve, and each month, each year, that idea got mutated a little bit, and now it's completely off the table. On the latest maps, it's off the table, and now that area is slated for development. So we think we should go back to that original idea, and that it was really very wise. So our community goals that are on that page, that's also on our website, is to have improved quality of life for residents, businesses, and visitors, improved community resilience so that we're responsive to a rapidly changing technological and climatic future, and sustainable economic growth with a local economy that sustains itself and the environment. Also, as an aside, I can't hear my voice very well, so if I'm going in and out of audio, and you guys should just let me know that. Okay. All right, good. So here's a little mosaic of some of the of the pictures of the coastal trail, and this is such a gem, such a jewel, such a boon for the community. So many people love this trail, and I'm one of them. And it's just such an amazing resource, and so exciting that we have this now, and a cause for rejoicement. And it's becoming world class and well known across the world already. So I think that this is an indication of the beauty and the splendor that's out there. And there's just so much to it, and it's not simply the trail, it's also the open space and the ability to breathe and look around and just feel like there's room to roam. I had a chance to hike the trail with a couple of the coastal commissioners when they were here, and they were blown away not only by the vistas from the trail looking out into the ocean, but just the amount of space that was out there and the ability to just feel it all in and have breathing room. They've been on so many coastal trails all up and down the coast, and so many of them are one directional. You have to look out towards the ocean. You don't want to turn around and look what's right behind you. And so they really, that was something that really struck me. We made it all the way out to Otsuchi Point, and then the overlook of the lowland area and the mill pond, and that area, and it's not just the trail itself. There's so much more potential out there. Like that little beach right there is so small because of the berm that's behind it, but that has the potential for being a world-class beach as well, walking distance from downtown. And there's just a lot of restoration potential there. And I felt like it's really, really important to state up front that, on this theme of maintaining quality of life and improving quality of life, we understand and hear loud and clear that either getting a job or getting a better job or having more access to jobs, more jobs, is fundamentally the most important thing in improving the quality of life for so many people in this town. And we hear that loud and clear. And so that has to be part of any proposal, any solution, and is vitally important. And I'll touch back on that in a few minutes. In fact, it's regarding this idea of community resilience, this is the idea to bounce back from impacts. And so you think of a tree that's able to bend with the wind. It's flexible enough. It's not rigid. It doesn't blow over in a hurricane. It's able to bend with it and bounce back. And so the ability to bounce back after an impact, especially an unforeseen one, is resilience. And it's a really, really important aspect, especially with the way the world is changing. Climate's changing, the technology's changing, politics, so many aspects are changing. We don't know what's coming around the corner in the next 20 years, the next 5 years, let alone the next 20. So here's an example that's in the news right now, that the blob is back. I don't know if you all remember the blob, but that really hot water off the coast, and a lot of people say that was one of the things that really exacerbated the starfish melting disease. There's a melting starfish on the right. We've lost so many starfish up and down the coast. And there's factors, there's implications with the kelp die-off. There's so many intersecting aspects. Here's up there on the top left is a picture of a previous kelp bed, and here it is now, just 4 years later. The area in green is Van Dam, actually, from 2008 to 2016. And down on the bottom are the abalone. I remember, I've been diving for abalone my whole life, and they were always like 0, 1, over there on the left. They were healthy. And now the fishery's closed because the abalone are starving. They're all like the one on the right. It's actually a total travesty. And this is just one of hundreds of impacts that we're going to be facing over the next 20 years. And that's just on the climate side and the ecological side. The technology is changing so fast. We can't look in the rearview mirror anymore and think we know what's going in the future. For instance, how long before you lose your job to a computer? Robots are predicted to take over half of today's jobs in the next 10 to 20 years. Fortunately, Fort Bragg is lag time on that, but still, we can't count on that on everything, right? There's that aspect, and all these websites are linked from the presentation that you'll be able to access after this. This is a great graphic. You can't read it, but each row is a different job in our society. And the black size is the percentage or the number of people that have that job in our society. So the very top row is a retail salesperson, the most popular job in our society. And the black is the number of people that are in it now. And then the white is the predicted number of people after the robots are more effective. And it's a pretty stark difference. And you'll see that it's very different for the different jobs. And so that's a really important thing to be thinking about and figuring out when we're developing the mill site and saying, okay, do we want industry out there? Do we want a mill? And we need to be forward-looking and not looking in the rearview mirror. And this idea of a mill on the coast is a really great idea when it comes to self-reliance and resilience. And I think it should be on the table. And I think that there's some great options for industrial sites, either in city limits, north of town, but also in looking at getting some county land. And we could possibly negotiate a good deal with the county because they want us to, I forget, I'm spacing on the word right now, annex. If we were to annex some of the land from the county to be good for housing, which is going to help the county goals, then we could also annex some land for industrial, and hopefully we could work out a good deal with them so that, it doesn't take us 10 years until we can start seeing the benefits. So there's ideas here that are thinking, we should go slow on this portion of the mill site that people are saying that we should develop as industrial. Especially because also the economy is changing and more people are telecommuting. This is the typical day at work for a telecommuter, and the percentages of telecommuters, especially on the coast, is dramatically increasing. And here's another picture from iStock Photo. The picture on the lower left is a kind of an indication of a metaphor that if Fort Bragg is an amazing place to be able to walk out of your house and go for an amazing hike and see the ocean, that is going to help draw a lot of those kind of jobs and that kind of money to the economy. I don't know what to say about the person on the top left, except that I'm sure that never happens. So, looking further into the future, there's some great futuristic studies. This one's by the Millennium Assessment, in which 1,000 scientists got together to look at the future of life on Earth, and one sub-team looked at these different scenarios of what was plausible for the future. And at 2005, these were the 4 plausible scenarios. And more, there's this top right corner, which is order from strength, and they actually wrote a narrative, a fictional story about what it would be like, and it's really turning out to be the one that's been the most prophetic. And if we keep going down that route, it actually is good for the environment in the short term, because it causes things like, we're not shipping our trash to China anymore, which was pretty wasteful and tough on the global climate change. But then it all really catches up to us around the year 2030, 2040, and especially 2050. And so we need to be adaptive and develop the mill site such that we're able to adapt to those changes that are coming down the future that we don't know what they are. So we've got a catch-22 on our hand. Not a catch-20 or a catch-21, but this catch-22. And do you catch the ball, or do you catch the beehive, or do you let it fall and all the bees land around you? So do we develop the mill site as fast as possible to pump up our local economy and meet the needs for as many people as quickly as possible, or do we develop, or do we go wise and figure out really carefully some of these decisions and really look into the future and look into our crystal ball and take the time it takes to make those wise decisions? And what I'm proposing here, what we're proposing is that we're able to do both. We're able to get going as soon as possible, break ground as soon as possible, and get some buildings going, get some new housing going, as well as be careful about what's in the future, and by keeping some of the mill site for later. So now I'm going to pass things over to Bill, and Bill Lemos is a fantastic guy. It's really been wonderful to get to know him. So he was born just down the street here, actually. 4th generation resident of the coast, and is a retired teacher from from Mendocino. He has his PhD, and just a pleasure to work with. So he's also a former NRDC consultant, and Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you, John. You're too kind. My presentation is going to be based upon the goals of the consortium that are listed here. They're number 3 in terms of sustainable economic growth, and the objective listed underneath that as quantifiable economic benefits and cost of a vibrant, restored coastline. So as we look at what I have to present here, I think it's really important, and John teed it up really well, to keep in mind that we have this opportunity in our front yard here to use this piece of property, this around 400 acres or what's left of it now, to apply these principles that can move us from this economy that has been based upon extraction of resources. This paradigm shift now moves toward something that we could call an economy that is based on restoration and conservation projects. And I'd like to explain that as we have evolved already quite a bit in that direction. I mean, much of what we see here in Fort Bragg and Mendocino on the coast has been developed because of, go ahead for the next slide, the idea that there was no limit. And some of this will be an old story to most of you, but it can happen here if we look at the history and see that those topics listed on the left-hand side were not part of the Founding Fathers, and they were mostly fathers, dialogue about how we could become a community. So they probably didn't think anything about this watershed here in Casper other than it was to get it out as quickly as possible, get the resource out, get it to the mill, and then make it into lumber to make money. And actually, you know, if you look at it, it's a steam donkey in the middle of a stream bed here in Casper in the latter part of the 19th century, and it's called the flying machine, and it's called the flying machine because it moves really fast according to the standard of the time. And so the idea was get it out and get it out fast. And so it's sort of a graphic demonstration of the resource extraction mentality, and the reasons for that I won't go into because, I mean, it's obviously the resource was there and it was used. If we go to the next slide, we can see what GP's philosophy was here for many years. It's encapsulated in this t-shirt fragment that I have on my barn wall, "Doing it," the Georgia Pacific motto. And you notice that it's the doing part of it is in the present participle part. It's happening now. We're doing it. And there's really no consideration for tomorrow. It's all about today. And so that mentality led, you know, to the next generation of extraction into the 20th century, as well as the next phase of extraction in the ocean was this robust fishery that we had here in the 30s. There's a picture from a Noyo fish house. Just shows you how many fish there were. Nat Bingham, who was a leader of the Fishing Federation in Noyo in the 60s and 70s, once told me that the commercial fishing fleet had the potential to take 99% of the fish in the ocean. And when you see a photograph like this from the 30s, and the next slide, how many boats there were, this was the way we did things. We just put as many boats as we could in the river. We caught as many fish as possible because that's what people did. So these scenes are all but gone now, but they remind us that we need to be cognizant as we move forward of how we make this plan as we shift to this new paradigm of resource rehabilitation and conservation. So as we move to the next slide, if we can, we'll see the Big River Estuary. This is part of the Big River Purchase that became part of the land trust acquisition that was transferred to state parks in the early part of the 20s, the 2000s. It was logged heavily, but when it became obvious that it was going to be logged again by Georgia Pacific, and then when Campbell Hawthorne bought the property in 2000 or 1999, a group came together and said, we would like to preserve this property. So this is the way it looks today because $26 million was raised in a fairly short period of time to buy over 7,000 acres of this wetland. So this was also the cover of a grant that the students and teachers, I was on the staff of Mendocino High School and the School of Natural Resources with my colleague Robert Jamgoshen. We wrote a grant, we wrote many grants, but this was the cover of a grant for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, $40,000 to prove that there were juvenile coho being, they were using the estuary for refugia because a member that we were a member of, it was California Fish and Game at that point, he came over and we were doing a tour on Big River and he said, well, there's no fish in the lower part of the river. And I said, well, how about if we go and do a study and see if there are any? And he said, well, if you do that, I'll put efforts into getting some money for your project here to see if we can buy this property. So we actually, if you go to the next slide, got the students to write the grant. We received $40,000 from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we did that survey. And this is part of the first steps toward any restoration project. We got people involved doing the surveys that can lead to the restoration. And if we look at the next slide, we can see that real money came into this community for the Big River project. Quite a bit of real money, not just a little piddly $40,000 that Sonar could put into the project to prove that there are coho salmon in Big River in the lower stretches, but decommissioning roads and repairing gulch, the railroad gulch and fill slope restoration and all these projects. These are real projects that came to this community because of this restoration project on Big River. Much of it is completed, but a lot of it is ongoing. Parks is in the process of doing some of these as we speak. So as we move now to the next slide, these are some of just a few of the major conservation acquisitions and actualized dreams here on the Mendocino coast. This is how we shift. This is how we go from extraction to a resource that can be restored, and it's good for the economy. Heasers Drive is an excellent example. In the late 1950s, early 60s, a group of Mendocino residents decided they didn't want to see high-rises on the Mendocino Headlands. So they petitioned the state of California to preserve the Heaser Drive area, and that's now open, to state parks, and we can use that area as walking and hiking and driving and viewing birds and all that kind of stuff. Casper Headlands, Big River Estuary, the list goes on and on. We can see here, beside these ongoing grants, that each of these facets of restoration include things like research and monitoring, outreach and education, compliance and enforcement if there's any rules or regulations within these parks or restoration projects that need administration by officials. So those are all jobs that are related to restoration. So as we look to the next slide, this is not just local, this is a national project, this restoration as a guiding principle. Here's something in the Tennessee Valley that I found online. It's an effort to clean up our messes. It starts out the way it looked on the left-hand side, and we really like things neat and orderly where we can walk through things and not be tangled up in brush and ticks and all that kind of stuff. So creating open space, creating places where wildlife comes, creating jobs for people to create these kind of spaces is that economic shift that we should keep in mind as we're looking forward to what we have as an opportunity here on the coast. This USGS, U.S. Geological Service website, I don't know if it's still up. This is from 2016. I'm not sure the current administration in DC even knows it's there. If it does, because it was there a few years ago. I don't know if you saw the news this afternoon. The Trump administration just relaxed all the EPA water standards for the entire nation. It's going to be a big mess, but they did it. They got the EPA director to relax EPA standards for all waterways in the United States. But in any case, we take what is, oh, that's my 9 minutes. I'll go fast. A degraded ecosystem, and you can see immediate economic impacts, long-term impacts, and economic value. And finally, as we look toward the model that was going to help this community, there are benefits including aesthetics, recreation, fish and wildlife, and ecosystem services. And you get through that big list at the bottom. I mean, just one tiny example we were talking about today, the open headlands, the open grasslands, a perfect place for carbon sequestration to take place. And working together, as John said, we have all these groups, and this is a non-exclusive list. Please, if I've omitted or forgotten or have not listed you here, it's not by choice. There's just too many people and too many organizations and agencies to thank. Thank you all for coming here tonight, and thank you all for the time and effort you've put into this. We have these opportunities. Go ahead, John. To work with outside forces. This is a pretty book that the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation just published. Its cover says, "Explore the coast and its protected areas." And these are the kind of things that will entice people to come here and see the beauty that's here, and will go from this scene on Big River 150 years ago to this, where people want to come and enjoy our coast and enjoy what we have to share with the world. And I agree with John, this is a wonderful place to live, and I'm so happy that we're all here working together on this project. And with that, let me introduce Leslie Kashiwada. She moved here in 1999 after teaching biology in San Diego for 13 years. She's been teaching music and movement classes here with the Music Together program since 2003. She bought that business in 2005. She's now working for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and she's been there since 2015.
Working for Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
So Leslie, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, when we were trying to vamp, I thought I could sing "Hello, everybody. So glad to see you." Those of you who know Music Together know that's the hello song. And we are so glad to see you. So if we could go to the first slide, please. This is a recent zoning map. It might not be the most recent, but as of June, it's an ever-changing mosaic of zoning areas. And what we keep saying in city council meetings, planning commission meetings, is that it's that we need to plan open space as carefully as we plan development. But as soon as you say zoning, people think development, because really the only way people wrap their brain around open space is with that open space designation. And it's such a broad category, it's hard to know, well, what does that actually mean? And in addition, it's important that we don't, that we make sure that we don't just relegate open space to those areas that can't be developed. We really need to look at what's needed to create ecological integrity out there. And the map is not the territory. So let's look at the territory in the next slide. So this aerial shows that this is a highly modified landscape. It's been an industrial site for many, many decades. And so what does ecological integrity mean in this context? So there are a lot of different habitats out there, a lot of different kinds of plants and animals. It's not necessarily a healthy ecosystem out there, but there are things out there. I'll be talking about those more in a moment. And I want you to think about this in a metaphor of like a car. A car is a complex piece of machinery with many moving parts. But if you don't maintain it, it's not going to run very well. And it's the same here. If we have a lot of fragmented habitats that don't communicate with each other, that are sort of isolated from each other, it's not going to function very well. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a drone shot, and what you can see in this picture is there are actually a lot of plants out here, and where there are plants, there are animals. You know that there are bluffs out there. There's a lot of open space out there that you know, people say, well, it's asphalt or it's a lot of concrete, but you can see that there are a lot of plants. And these areas could be restored to coastal prairie, which is a very rare habitat because these areas tend to get developed. They're ponds and wetlands, riparian areas, and forests. So an ecosystem structure consists of all the living and non-living components that make up that ecosystem. And the more components there are, the more complexity there is. And the more complexity there is, the more resilience there is, so that if something happens to any one component, you have other animals or plants that can come in and fill in where that one organism went missing, or if there is a big flood, or if there's an earthquake. The more complexity there is, the easier it is for the system to recover. So I'm going to show you a few animals that we know are already out there that maybe you don't know are out there. So next slide. So burrowing owls, I'd love to spend time talking about them, but I don't have that much time for my talk. They live in treeless areas like grasslands. There has been a survey of burrowing owls. It's dated, but there is one. Next slide. Pacific tree frogs, we all know them. We all hear them. They live where it's moist, and because they breathe through their skin, they are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine. They'll let you know if there's something wrong in the environment. Next slide. Red-shouldered hawks. There is a mating pair that's been in the forest for many, many years. They mate for life. They live in the forest next to riparian areas where they hunt. And they come back to the same nest every year. So next slide. There's thank you. Yes. So these are other things that we know are out there, that we've seen out there, like red fox, Anna's hummingbird, black-tailed deer, white-tailed kites, bats, which are great insect eaters, western gray squirrels. There are lots of other animals out there, but these are just a few of the ones that you might see and that could really thrive in a healthy environment. Okay, next slide. This is a picture of the riparian area that's across from Rite Aid. There is a stream that flows through it. So just sort of keep that image in your mind, thinking about what it might be like to walk through this. And then we're going to do this experiment and see if the video will start. And I'm only going to show part of it because it's too long. But this is a video that I took walking on Main Street with my phone. And you need to make sure the sound is down because the traffic noise is horrendous. It surprised me when I played it on my computer. So this is starting at Cypress and walking towards Walnut. So walking from Rite Aid to Safeway, but on the west side of the road. And so we'll see if this actually works.
Just start talking.
Okay, so it starts with a riparian area. So you're going to see riparian shrubs and then trees, mostly alders. And then it moves into conifers, and then you'll see a stand of eucalyptus, or not, depending on if we could get it started. But you'll also see other things. You will see that there are invasive plants there. For instance, there's ivy, there's French broom, there's Himalaya blackberry. All of those are very invasive. They do really like to come into disturbed edge environments, so that's why they're there by the road. The ivies climbing up many trees will eventually kill those trees if they're not removed. So if you haven't taken this walk, since my video's not working, and that's okay, I really encourage you to do it. And imagine what it might be like to be walking through this. So, so why should we care? So this forest is an important habitat on the Headlands ecosystem, and it's a scenic and visual resource. It could be a retreat from noise, from light, from the busyness of everyday life. It's also a historical and cultural resource, as has been mentioned, because Union Lumber had the nursery there, which is why a lot of these tall trees are there. And so it's important that it be managed in a way that allows new trees to come in, allows the old trees to naturally senesce. A lot of dead and dying trees are actually important habitats for certain animals. And so just because a tree is dead or dying doesn't mean that it's not fulfilling function in the ecosystem. Union Pacific used to bring out school groups, and it could still serve that same function in education. To teach about life cycles, about different types of trees and what grows where. It's just one piece in that habitat mosaic that's the ecosystem out there. So just go to the next slide. So, and if anyone wants that video, maybe I should upload it onto YouTube. I've never done that, but I could learn how. So go ahead to the next slide. Yes. Got to go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So the next slide is a picture of a boardwalk going through a forest, and just to imagine what it might be like to have something like that in our community, where you could walk even just a couple of trees in from Main Street would be so much quieter. There's something called forest bathing, which is a real thing. It's something that research has shown can actually reduce anxiety and boost immunity. There are actually doctors that are writing prescriptions for people to engage in forest bathing. So if you have this kind of a boardwalk, and I really like boardwalks because it reduces the impact on the ground, then just imagine having that in our community right here, accessible from downtown. Next slide, please. So this is something that shows that mosaic of habitats. You can see the riparian area and forest down in the lower part, then the restored coastal prairie that could be in that area that currently is zoned for light industrial, and then restored estuary, and then there are wetlands all around that area that's a coastal prairie, so I couldn't quite figure out how to indicate that. Those are all isolated habitats. They're not going to thrive on their own. They need to be connected to the wider natural habitat, and that's most accessible to the north, which is why we've been repeatedly asking for and have actually, our voices have been heard for having a wildlife corridor going to the north, to Pudding Creek watershed, and to McCarricker. And so, next slide, please. That wildlife corridor needs to really keep animals and humans separate, because this is what happens when humans and animals interact, especially cute animals. This is a ground squirrel on the trail. It was very aggressive with me. If I hadn't walked away, it probably would have tried to climb me, and that's because people feed them. They're very fat. And it's not good for them, and it's not good for humans. So when people come in contact with wild animals, they often behave inappropriately towards those wild animals. So it's important that this wildlife corridor really keep humans and wildlife separate, so wildlife can stay wild and could be viewed, although many of them move at night, but not be interacted with. So that means maybe some kind of animal-friendly fencing, or even rail fencing, something that would keep most people from trying to gain access. I mean, some people are going to go over a fence no matter what. Okay, so next slide. So I want to go back to this zoning map, and I just want to point out that it shows a lot of fragmented habitats. with that industrial area in the middle, you've got wetlands that are separated from other wetlands rather than keeping it all as one unified whole. And there are pinch points in that wildlife corridor, especially in the area between Redwood and Alder, because there's zoning out there that allows for development, and especially that parking lot, which comes up right against the trail. So the wildlife corridor kind of disappears there. So you need to have restored wetlands without fences. You need to have a place for these animals to move. So I just want to point out that whenever you look at these zoning maps, think about some of these things. Does it achieve these goals of maintaining ecological integrity out on the headlands? Next slide. So the take-home message, and this was taken from Safeway parking lot this morning, is that ecological integrity requires preservation and restoration of the habitats that are on the headlands, not fragmentation, especially because of edge effects, and especially when you have pinch points, which don't allow for things to move freely. That connection to larger habitats is extremely important. So I'm going to hand off now to George, and you've already heard a bit about him. He and his wife Sharon moved to Fort Bragg in 2003, and he co-founded NUDGE, the Noyo Headlands Unified Design Group, and he's been involved with mill site reuse issues since moving to Fort Bragg, and he's going to talk about the wetland areas.
Thank you, Leslie. This first slide, not this one, this one. This first slide shows, this is a drone shot showing the crumbling beach berm, the low-lying area behind it, and part of the still toxic old mill pond. Now, one of the very good news things for our community, though we haven't heard that much about it, is that DTSC has ordered additional testing. I'm not sure if this laser will work at this acute angle, but can you all see this area here? This pond is right below, thank you, John, is right below a man-made little wall here that is absolutely toast with sea level rise and climate change. And I'm going to show you a couple of subsequent slides, but what has been decided by DTSC is additional testing is now being done in these low-lying ponds, which have the highest listen to this conundrum for our community, has the highest concentrations of dioxin on the whole mill site that were found, but they couldn't clean those because if they cleaned those, it would destabilize the wall, which would make the mill pond less secure. So we were in this, again, another catch-22. And so what we really need to do is be supportive of the state agencies that are requiring this cleanup, which our community has always been promised. And we need to have that in the forefront of our minds all the time and not lose sight of the cleanup issues. I want to say that our current city council has said very clearly that cleanup is very important to them. We are not in any way saying they do not acknowledge this, but it is really important for our community to communicate with DTSC. Our community is being listened to because we do communicate. Next slide, please. This shot taken last year shows how vulnerable the berm and the low-lying area behind it are. And as I mentioned earlier, coastal communities up and down the coast are being charged with the responsibility of adapting to climate change and sea level rise. And we are very fortunate because our community is well above sea level. So we have more time to do this planning, but we have to do this planning. This also reveals the old pilings from the old pier there. Next slide, please. Much higher tide here lashes the old berm. The berm was never tested for toxics and should be thoroughly cleaned up. This is GP's responsibility. They are completely shining this on in the conversations. And we really should start talking about this. Get rid of the berm, because what you see here is just a high tide, but add a king tide to this and a storm event, and we'll be overtopping this crappy old berm, and we need to prepare ourselves for the time when this is going to be completely underwater. We're going to have an estuary out there, folks, within the lives of the people in this room. Next slide, please. So here are the consequences of ignoring Mother Nature. This is one of a couple of shots I have of Pacifica. And in Pacifica, there's a raging battle about whether or not to take this notion of retreat seriously. And we actually have, it's shocking, but we have real estate people who say, we do not want to talk about retreat. It will affect our property values. Well, it will. That is pretty clear. Next shot, please. So this is an example of what in the old days was called coastal armoring. This is also a shot from Pacifica. It's no longer allowed. The Coastal Commission is not allowing armoring, which was big boulders, maybe cement, all kinds of different attempts to keep the ocean at bay, and it ain't gonna work anymore, folks. Here's a next shot from Southern California. It's Southern California, but it's that same darn old Pacific Ocean, and guess what? It's coming, folks. So back to the Headlands, we can see that there is a huge amount of land out here. I want to thank Gabriel again for these wonderful drone shots, and we're gonna have a number of links to these shots, an Emerald Globe website he has on YouTube where you can see a number of really fantastic aerial shots. But this is a huge area. There's plenty of land for us to daylight the creeks, restore coastal headlands, and still have acres and acres of land to develop commercially. The costs of developing commercial infrastructure are very high. Some people, when they're talking about the LCP, are very unrealistic about who's going to pay for the infrastructure. I often hear at meetings, well, developers will pay for the infrastructure. That actually never happens. I mean, they say they will. So really, folks, do not expect the developers to come in here and rescue us from the issues of providing plumbing, electricity, road infrastructure, all that stuff. The developers will do those little parts of it that they're willing to do. We really have to see that a smaller footprint is in our best interests because it will save us a ton of money and it will also be better for our downtown. We do not want to impoverish our downtown with damaging development. We really should keep our commercial development close to downtown, in my opinion. So another shot, yep. This place is huge. This gives an idea of where we're proposing the wildlife corridor to go, going north from, you can see where the ocean's kind of coming in there, yes, and then right along that area is where we're proposing a larger wildlife corridor than is currently being contemplated, but this is an ongoing community discussion, and that's what we're doing. That's part of this, why we're here. The next one, next slide, please. So this is a old historic map that shows the mill pond and the berm. So it's the old creek profiles overlaid on the mill pond and the berm. And let me see. Maple and Alder Creeks converge in the low-lying area right behind the old beach berm. And this will all be an estuary before you know it, folks. Probably before we get the proposal for the LCP back from the Coastal Commission. We should not assume that asphalt and concrete must stay. Next slide, please. These legacies of human abuse and neglect are restored all the time. With open space designation, we can also specify exactly what our community's intentions are. I've talked at length with the staff of the Coastal Commission, and we have been told sometimes at public meetings that open space is a dangerous designation. If we're clear about our intentions with open space, it's a perfectly useful and safe way to go, I believe. So, for example, we might say open space to be restored to a more natural watershed and estuary. This is also consistent with the adaptation and sea level rise that is being mandated by the state of California. So next one, here Mother Nature is taking back the environment. Let's go back to this one slide. I omitted my comment on this, but yeah, we'll go back to this. These are two very alarming statistics, and they are accurate. Just take a moment to think about that. We humans have to save half of planet Earth for living things. We've already taken up more than half. We have to start restoring areas that have been trashed by us. So now, this next slide, I think, is, this is the concrete. So we got a little bit behind. I'm sorry, John, I wasn't giving you accurate cues, I guess. So this was meant for the asphalt and concrete. We do not have to leave asphalt and concrete where they are. They are restored all the time. Next slide. So here, Mother Nature is taking back the environment in and around an old building on Alcatraz. We could leave a small part of the Central Parkland area as a nature reclaims man's mistakes park. This is being done. This is not a unprecedented idea. And the idea here is that you save about 5 acres, and you have, again, a boardwalk walking through, and you take a couple places and you drill a hole down and you plant a tree in the midst of the asphalt. You do these different things. And then we all, using methods of citizen science, we look at the consequences and what's happening and what's growing there and how the asphalt is being peeled away. I propose that this is entirely consistent with the vision that many of us have for Fort Bragg being a healing, healthy, natural environment. And this is a bit of a kind of a legacy thing we could do. I saw a beautiful park like this in the McBride Gardens on Kauai, and it's just spectacular. They have displays and they tell you about the history and the old mill that used to be nearby. It was a sugar mill. But, it can be a lovely amenity out there. So here are the gardens, next shot. The gardens on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. This kind of work is beautiful and rewarding. It is also labor intensive and a community builder. A fitting vision for Fort Bragg that has just declared itself the garden-friendly city. And this is a fantastic effort that is also about local resilience and carbon sequestration. So we are in a position to further that effort. This next one is a reminder, next shot, is a reminder of the history of the site. Bear with me while I get a sip of water here. But here, what I did was I traced in scale the top line is Alder Creek, the middle one is Maple Creek, and this was a old creek that started up somehow in the middle of the property and was on this old coastal map. Next slide. So, when we finally get down to daylighting Maple and Alder Creeks, and I know we will have to study the hydrology, stormwater needs of Fort Bragg, and other issues. There are many communities daylighting creeks. This is being done around the world. And here, this is a shot from New Jersey where they're pulling up the old buried creek, and eventually a beautiful creek went in here. Next slide, please. And this is a community coming together to do the work to daylight the creek. And these are ideal both educational and citizen science opportunities. And again, I believe that if we as a community start seeing ourselves as a healing community, a community that heals the land, as well as creating an environment that is healthy for ourselves, for human beings, we have an opportunity to do something very terrific here. Third slide is actually from Ackland, where they did a big restoration project, uncovered some buried creeks, and this is being done all over the place. We have a community member who's told us about this happening in the Netherlands. It's really fantastic stuff, and I really think it can be important for our future. Now, I want to say, this is a little bit visionary, but I do that sometimes. In my opinion, it's not too far-fetched to say that Fort Bragg could become a center of healing. Healing the land, researching the healing of our oceans, practicing the healing arts of carbon sequestration, if we protect the natural beauty of this place, and that means no sprawl, folks, really careful development out there, really careful, not just filling in all the empty space. We can heal this sometimes ragged human spirit when we look at some of the things that are happening environmentally and the emergencies we're in, and I've just shown you some really frightening slides and some frightening statistics. And I don't apologize for this, but I recognize that the thing to end on is the absolutely true, optimistic idea that if we come together as a community, there are agencies that at the state level, in spite of what EPA just did, stupid EPA, it'll probably be stopped by, this is Trump appointees. As soon as we get somebody else in there, we'll change that stuff around. There is tons of support for the work that we're talking about. And on the other level, the level of being a healing community, we already have, it's a little bit below some people's radar, but we already have a community that is all about healing and having a healthy lifestyle, both diet-wise and energetically. So consider these opportunities, and we really need to, how can I put this? Take care, but as John was saying, John and I clash about this a little bit. I don't know about moving fast, because what's wrong about saying moving fast is whatever we come up with, it will probably go to the Coastal Commission for at least 1.5 years, folks. So don't kid yourself about fast, but understand that the people who are up here are not saying, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing. So this is a difficult balance, and one of the reasons why we're so grateful that we have the time to come here. Now, I'm going to pass it back to John. John was raised here on the coast. He is more than just a scientist. He is a Little League coach. He and his wife, Wendy, are raising their 3 children here in our community. So take it away, John.
All right. Thank you very much, George. That was great. Thanks, everybody. That was really well done. And so I think that what I'm going to do here is wrap things up a little bit with some details, try and bring this all together. And even before getting into it, I want to emphasize a point that I was talking with folks earlier about, which is, getting back to this theme of teamwork and working together and respect. It just, I can't thank the city council enough for the opportunity and the encouragement for the public to be engaged and to be involved. Thank you very much to Mayor Lee for suggesting that we give this presentation, and for the city council and the planning commission for agreeing. I just think that it's just so exciting to really have this engagement and civic engagement. So, even the people up here on the panel don't agree with everything, and I'm sure we all don't agree with everything. But this is how we're going to get to the best solution: is talking about it, working it through, and acting as fast as possible. I think that what I won't miss. As fast as possible is going to take time, as George said. Once we figure out what we want to pass on to the Coastal Commission, they're going to probably sit on it for up to 1 year, I believe, is the maximum. Okay. Well, I thought they had a requirement to get it back to us within 1 year, but anyway, those are the minor details. One of the points here that I want to bring about is that I'm coining a new term here that is wise growth, which is the combination of smart growth and also forward thinking. And so smart growth, as we presented in the March presentation, is this idea that you want to be as efficient and sustainable, and do this type of land development that optimizes prior infrastructure investments and consumes less land. There's a much fuller definition by the American Planning Association, and this idea of forward thinking is that consider these ideas of resilience that we talked about, and self-reliance, and Fort Bragg has the potential, and the Mendocino Coast has the potential to be one of the most self-reliant places in California. And the adaptability to adapt to what's coming down the pike. So combine that forward thinking with smart growth, and that's how you get wise growth. So for wise growth on the Headlands, it's important to recognize that when we did the build-out analysis of a previous plan, even the plan that had a lot of urban reserve in it, it was found that it would still take 50 years to develop it to its extent. But there was no requirement that it had to develop from the urban core outward. And so you can get this spotty development of buildings all the way out towards the coastal trail, blocking other views, and it could be much more haphazard. And also there's a lot of the south parcel, much of the whole mill site really doesn't have that much infrastructure. And so it's really important to be careful and just build adjacent to existing development. If you have, here's a picture of Todd's Point over there on the left from the early 80s, and you could see that it was zoned by the county. You had this spotty development that was happening already back then. And so, as a result, what's happened out there is not a very compelling and exciting place, and it doesn't have that many people in it, and it's just kind of, we could do better on the mill site and on the Headlands. And so, the objective on that handout, I encourage everybody to grab one of the handouts on the way out. Objective 2 is to develop adjacent to existing development. And so to emphasize that and to illustrate that, I want to unveil our mapping project that we've been working hard at for the last couple years. And so this is one of the things that Conservation Biology Institute has facilitated by creating Databasin, which is this online web mapping platform. We got a $5 million grant back in 2007 to build it, and we've had another $5 million to maintain it and develop it further. And so it's a free resource, and what we have done with a great grant from the Community Foundation, which has been very generous, as well as 2 amazing donations from some anonymous donors, we've been able to build up our mapping platform portal, which is a resource that everybody here in the room can use when they go home. Just go to our website, go to the mapping portal, and it's there for your use. And I will give a short demo and even some tips after the break. So, of course, there's also that note on the far right side. All donations are tax deductible and quite welcome to help keep things moving forward. And we're looking at different possibilities, including, I won't get into that right now, but there's you can earmark donations for one of a couple different things, including more community engagement and training on the mapping portal, but also other aspects that you think are helpful in some of the things we're doing. So the mapping project, here's a little screen grab of some of the maps in the gallery. And we've added more since. And what I'm going to do is actually switch over to live on the internet. We'll see how this goes. I have a few screen grabs in case that doesn't work. But here is one of the maps that I wanted to portray here. And so, again, this is all on the browser, free for anybody to use. And so what we have here are 3 colors for the mill site as a way of just trying to simplify and put our message straightforward in a straightforward manner. The darker green are the areas that have already been decided, including the coastal trail, the wastewater treatment plant. And what we're saying is, let's get back to the idea from back in 2014 that made a lot of sense, which is to develop the areas and decide on the areas for open space and development that we have consensus on, and save the areas for later that we're not sure about, and to be flexible and adaptive to all the changes that are coming down the pike in the future. It was a very wise decision, and it just was an idea that had a death by 1,000 cuts. And so I think that we need to bring that back on the table at the very basic level, which is here it is zoned as the decide later zoning. And so, and here's option 2, by the way. And I rolled out option 1 at one of our conference calls earlier today, and this is the latest consensus. And so, what you can do is just kind of take this as kind of a general idea on illustrating how some of the principles we've talked about can be implemented. Now, there's other various detailed maps that we can get into, including the one that we presented back in March 21st, which is available online and also on the website. There was one that was even created 6 months previous to that by one of the consortium members, Doug Kern. And so what I did is I took Doug Kern's map and I just went ahead and added it onto the website and added it onto this map. And so one of the tools is the swiper tool, and so you can actually swipe between different layers. And so here's that map that Doug created, and so this illustrates some of the things that Leslie was talking about. So, you know, this area that we sometimes call as the donut hole is part of this whole the ecological integrity, the aspect of as one whole united whole. And there's the daylighted creeks, you know, in a rough location. And, you know, his idea was just a sketched out idea. This was before the skunk train brought this area up here. But he was like saying, yeah, let's have some development up here. There's some parks. Let's make sure that there's a wildlife corridor. And, you know, this was kind of the save for later up here and save for later down here. And, you know, he even suggested more development down here. So you know, there's variations on this theme, but I really think we should get back to these basics and really save for later some of the areas that are going to be super, super important. And in fact, I wanted to have a slide here of that opening slide that we had when you walked in the room. Let's see if it's here. And so that opening slide that was when we walked in the room is, let's see, come on. There it is the area that we're talking about. And I think that, you know, it's this large field and grassland, and there's just so much potential for what could happen out there. These are some of the things that we've talked about over the years. And I think that it's okay to save that for later. Save that decision for a few years from now. We'll have a lot more better idea of what's going on in the world and of the different opportunities. In the meantime, we could be moving everything forward and be breaking ground over there on the skunk train property, on the harvest property, if they, you know, want to develop their lands and move that forward. You know, there's so many ideas that were talked about in the past that A, it was 15 years ago when they were talked about and shot down, or B, some of the studies are downright faulty. You know, everybody might disagree about the benefits and costs of having a university of some sort here, especially one that we would target. But the study that shot it down looked at how many students there were living in Fort Bragg and on the coast now, and whether or not there were enough students here now to fill a university. And nope, there weren't. Ideas off the table. All right, I'm doing this from memory from back when I was here, you know, coming into the area at 2013 when I was trying to get up to speed. But you know, that stuck with me ever since. And so I think that we have the time as a community to figure out what to do on this area and be wise about it and start moving forward with everything else. So the final slides I will zip up to. Thanks everybody for your rapt attention. It's been wonderful to see out in the audience, see heads nodding. I don't see anybody sleeping, which is really exciting. So we're almost done here. And so, let's see here. Yeah. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. So on our final slide, I'm revisiting that slide in which I laid out what it was that some of the things we were going to hit on, and right now PowerPoint is not wanting to even accept a click. So sometimes when you have a really big slideshow, it just says, you know what, I'm done. So I will remember what was on this slide. And I will actually remember what happened. Yeah, so the harvest property is right here. So here's Cypress coming out right here, and there's Safeway, that big white building. So Harvest bought the property right across from Safeway, that grassland right there, as well as the forest. Yeah, so the last slide was simply a summary of the concept that I've laid out a couple different times. So I think that in general, the bigger idea, I mean, kind of the new idea that we really put forward and emphasized was this idea of the decide later zoning, or going all the way back to even before it was called urban reserved. It was just reserve, and it. That's like really one of the emphases, and then of course add on to that the things we talked about in March and touched on, such as really, it's great that the city council agreed that we need to have a wildlife corridor, and it's going to be really important to work out the details. I understand that the skunk train has, they've hired a consultant that can really dig into that deep, which is fantastic. And and the importance of the connectivity of the area. So what we're going to do is we're going to open things up to questions and comments and a little dialogue. And thanks to everybody for your attention. So thank you.
There's a bunch of questions I have that have been coming up while y'all are talking, and if I had my little notepad, I'd have had a whole plethora of things. But of course, the most critical thing that I'm thinking of right now is climate change, oceans rising, and you're identifying wonderful wildlife corridors or development areas. But George, you might have a very fast answer on this one. What's the lowest spot of these use areas as far as level off the ocean now, and what's the highest point?
Well, I tried to show in my very first slide, and John might be able to go through some of these things. The mill pond is at about maybe 50 or 60 feet, but below the mill pond, behind the beach berm, it's just a few feet above sea level. The beach berm goes up to about 12 or 14 feet, but it is going to be overtopped soon enough. And some of these numbers are a little sketchy, but that area that the trail goes around, the final completed part of the coastal trail goes around the low-lying area on the mill pond and of the property. And the mill pond is a little higher, but it is completely toast with a rising sea, as is that beach berm. So the low-lying area behind the beach berm is the lowest.
Right, and we have a map up here too.
Yeah.
This is one of the maps that's in the mapping site.
And it gives you
This is
elevations.
elevations.
Yeah.
So it seems that it'd be a very good idea to just take into consideration or just say that is going to be a zone it's going to be an estuary. And then
I agree.
And how much of, and it's kind of, how much of that has dioxin contamination at this point?
That area is not terribly polluted. There's been some cleanup in that area, except for those little ponds that I pointed out during my part of the talk,
Right.
which is very, very toxic. So that is exactly what's going on right now with DTSC. But I'm not trying to make people feel that it's dealt with, because we as a community have to keep saying, we want that area cleaned up. The stage we're in now is they're doing further sampling. Then DTSC will give an answer whether they feel that stuff all needs to be hauled away because of sea level rise and climate change. If they say that, we can anticipate that Georgia Pacific will protest. And then we will have to join the fray, and better to start right away to say, we really want that cleaned up. We believe climate change is real and happening, and we're a healing community, and we don't want all those poisons in the middle of our front yard.
Well, I hear you, but it kind of reminds me of the refrain in the old pop song, "We won't be fooled again."
Right.
You know, so how, and the mill pound is 50 feet?
It's at about, well, it is, I'm not sure. Does anybody know the answer to that for sure? A city council person? The city is, you know, 10, 20 feet higher than that, and I think the city starts at around 60 or 70. So I'm guessing at the mill pond's altitude.
It's
But
12
the wall is going to go.
I
It's
got
just
it.
an old man laying.
No, I got it, I got it.
No.
So where is all this happening? The mill pond has been going on for how many years? I mean, it's been definitely more than a decade.
Now's the time to tell the story of the Hudson River Valley, and I'll make it quick. Georgia Pacific is not alone in being corporations that drag their feet about cleanups. General Electric has been told for decades, it's probably stalled for over 60 years, and we better not have that happen here. I mean, the mill closed, you know, basically 17 plus years ago. But on the Hudson River, GE fought and fought and fought that cleanup. When finally the community started having things really cleaned up, it was an incredible economic boon to all of those communities that could stick the straw into the Hudson River and get their water from there. They didn't have to pipe water from different supply places. You know, it is in our best interests and in the best interests of, you know, the world at large that we basically deal with this cleanup issue now. And that's all we're saying. Not that everything should stop, but it really has to be the highest priority, in my opinion.
No, I'll stop after this. It seems to me, and I've said this often at the city council meetings, is that the best investment that the community of Fort Bragg can make is create as much wild areas on that, and cleaned up areas on that headland as possible, if for no other reason, that'll raise the property values all over the city, because this is going to be one of the most beautiful natural places to live, and there are going to be people all over this country and all over the world that want to go someplace that is restored and gives them hope for the future.
I agree, and Bailey, I do believe we should let other people talk too, but, you know, I mean, I understand completely. Any final thing you want to say about that? Yeah, I think that's true.
I just want to thank you guys for sticking it out and getting together and hanging in there, seriously, and I'd like to help in any way that I can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Doug Hammerstrom, and I have 3 points here, I think, and just ask them one at a time. First couple are short here. I would, hearing John talk about teamwork as how we should approach things, I was just wondering if, I certainly would encourage you to bring that teamwork perspective to engagement with Harvest Market and the skunk train, and I see nods, so I assume that means that's the way you're approaching whatever engagement you may have with them already.
I just want to quickly say that we were invited to participate in a meeting at the skunk train with the consultant that they hired to look at the wildlife corridor, which is actually a much bigger project than just for their property, because it really involves looking at what's to the south and what's to the north of them. But they were very open and willing to have us at the table, us meaning me, because I'm the one who attended, and they also had city staff there as well. And George and I have met with Harvest Market, although it was just after they bought the property, but So we'll just say for the record, we're absolutely willing and interested in participating in discussions.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
And then, John, when you were talking about delay, we'll find out what future technology is. It just made me think about zero net energy buildings, and buildings are probably of what humans create the longest life thing. So when we build a building that meets today's technology, it's going to be there for 90 years, and it's not like a refrigerator that if they come up with a new technology in 10 years, you'll be ready to trade yours out. So is zero net energy part of what you're studying or bringing into this dialogue? Or?
May I try a quick answer, and you can jump in, John? I am very, and Doug, actually, you know this, you and I have talked about net zero building for a long time. It is a really important thing. And what we're trying to do as a consortium, though, is not get too into the minutia of those different things. That's a bit of a different conversation, because right now what we're really trying to do is get a focus on the necessity of giving open space and restorable areas out there the highest priority. And by highest priority, I do not mean more than net zero or more than, I mean, for me, it's pretty relevant that you're not going to be able to buy a fossil fuel car in California in 10 years. It'll at least be a hybrid, and there's mostly electric is what California Air Resources Board is planning. So putting a whole lot of big streets out there for heavy cars makes no sense, actually. So there are a lot of kind of design and planning issues, but we really want the community right now to come together around this idea of restoration and creek daylighting as a central piece of how we look forward to the development of the mill site. But net zero building, really important.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, which is one of the things, it actually hits on both of your points. One of the things we've talked about with regards to teamwork is recognizing that we have a really broad mission. So I just flashed up here our website, and Susan Kelly, who's not here, did an amazing job of building this out.
Hi, Susan. She's watching on
Yeah, hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
The mission itself is really broad, and what we've talked about is, you know, when we have the capacity and the bandwidth, we really want to figure out how to invite more people and to make this a broader consortium. You know, because the definition of a consortium is many different organizations and individuals with a common mission, and so this mission statement fits perfectly with net zero energy. And so there could be very feasibly, you know, one of the things we've been talking about is if we're able to raise $5,000, we can actually make an effort to do this, to build this bigger, broader community of people that have this similar mission. And so there could definitely be a working group on net zero energy or green building. And you know, the mission is to help achieve environmentally sound strategies for restoration and reuse of Fort Bragg Headlands that will improve the quality of life and economy for our coastal community. So thank you for that comment, and let's be in touch. I think I still have your email.
Okay. And one last thing, and I'll leave out all my anecdotal stories of why a non-scientist comes to the conclusion that that wall, which I put in quotes, below the main pond is going to fail. I mean, right. I could say why a non-scientist comes to that conclusion, but I'm hoping that you have the science. And my question is DTSC operating on the assumption that that wall is going to fail and whatever is in the pond is then going to be in the ocean?
Yeah, I think in our walkabout, John and I walked with a couple of Coastal Commission members, and they absolutely could see the fact that staring them right in the face is that that wall's coming down. And so they know. And anyone who looks at old rotting redwood cribbing knows that it's not going to last forever, even though it's old growth or second growth that's very old. It's in a state of deterioration that is not going to last for long. But I wanted to comment, just Doug, on your question or your point about zero net energy. You know, crystal ball gazing is a great way to play the game of I know more than anybody else because I see something that somebody else doesn't see coming. We don't know. We put this consortium together because we are hoping that the whole community will gaze into this ball of a restored economy through projects that we can all get behind. And I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you look at some of the changes that have happened so rapidly in our lifetime. I'm just thinking of this time of year when I was, 20 years old, 50 years ago. We were fishing for salmon in these rivers every afternoon on every Saturday and Sunday in September. We can't do that anymore. I mean, it's just changed so dramatically in our lifetime. So, yeah, zero net energy. Can we achieve that? Well, let's gaze into a crystal ball and say we can. I'm all for that.
Well, thank you for leading this work and hope that many of us can join you in it. So.
You're welcome, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Rex Crescent. Where to begin? Leslie, the pictures of the forest that you showed that can be restored so beautifully, we've just been fighting with the Planning Commission to keep them from deforesting that area. And the problem is, there's a couple of problems. One is the GP owns the property. And you get told that by any time you talk to the city council about it privately, they'll say, well, GP owns the property. When Marie Jones did the zoning proposal on the LCP, she allocated 70% of the property for development and kept 30% of it as open space. When she took that proposal to the Coastal Commission flipped those numbers. They said, oh no, you have to leave 70% of it open space and you can develop 30% of it. She didn't tell anybody that though. She didn't mention it to the city council. There were no public releases. You had to find out through the Coastal Commission. But in fact, they reversed the percentages of open space to 70%. GP owns that 70%. And I think you guys know more about what's out there than I do. I have always been under the impression that 70% of the land is filled with broken concrete and rubble, and it's great to hear that there are animals out there, but it has never been adequately tested. I think we can all agree on that. And certainly it's if it were to be open to public, it would be it would be impossible. The broken concrete and rubble, and GP owns that. And therefore, I've been told by several members of the city council that because GP owns it, it's their problem. You can't do anything about it. It's going to stay that way. But that doesn't bother GP because they can sell off as much as the Coastal Commission will allow them to sell off, which is 30%, which is exactly what they're doing. So what you have is a development project that's happening out there. I don't want to digress into how that happened. There were influences on the city council that put strong pressure behind the scenes to make for jobs. Okay, let's not go there. George is saying don't go there. I hear that. But the development of the mill site is relevant, George, in this respect.
Oh, yes.
That if we were, as a community, to take a look at this haphazard zoning. Right now, the zoning includes high-density housing, light industrial, heavy industrial. It's this hodgepodge. As you pointed out eloquently, Leslie, it disrupts the corridors. It's a jigsaw puzzle of development, and it's happening. You guys may be able to fight Harvest Market back on the cutting down the trees, but it doesn't look like it. And I'm the only one of us here that's been to all of those planning commission meetings, and I can tell you that it does not look good. Harvest Market has a lot of influence, and City Hall is known for caving into influence, not so much with the new city council. But the fact of the matter remains that there will be 70% of that property in which nothing is going to happen. They're not going to clean it up. They're not going to take up the asphalt. They're not going to take up the concrete. And I believe that you can get the community mobilized, and I applaud your efforts to do this, George. It's very good to light the fire of ambition about what we can do at the mill site. But the way things are now legally, and the way things are now in terms of what the city council has repeatedly, over years and years and years, has put into black and white. The reason that haphazard zoning out there is because of the city council, because in numerous meetings, dozens of meetings, they decided that's the way it's going to be, because they want jobs. Now, I'll wrap this up. I'm sorry to take too long, but I have always said that zoning the property for jobs is ridiculous. If somebody's going to bring a factory to Fort Bragg, I don't see why they have to be out on the coastal trail. They would let them go north of town, south of town. East of here are hundreds of miles of empty space. We just have a few precious acres, 420 precious acres out there on the mill site. And if the community were unified and said, with a single vision, I appreciate your talk about the future and about what could or could not happen in the future, but if we had a single big idea, an idea that would bring us all together, and we just said, no, that we are a smart enough community to know that we own something of incalculable value, that what we need to do is zone it open space. And those entrepreneurs who've invested in the property knew that it wasn't zoned. And I had a big email thing, a couple of articles. I don't know if you caught my articles about Harvest Market, but Harvest Market was, we don't care what you do with it. We're good with it. They preferred, however, to build a supermarket. But if we say as a community, let's zone it open space, then, George, we open up a possibility that you have not talked about tonight, which is that in the coastal communities of Oregon and Washington and California, $40 billion has been allocated to, Leslie knows about this, has been allocated by major funding institutions with the one criteria, that it be open space, that it be friendly to animals, that it be a place where people can go, that it not be high density housing, that it not be light industrial, heavy industrial, all this stuff that they've got. I can't even remember all the categories that are currently in the zoning plan. So if we come together and say, we lit a fire tonight, but what we need to do is we need to take the zoning proposal that's on the table right now and say, screw it. We're going to make this open space, because the city of Fort Bragg is smart enough to realize that open space is the best use for that property. Now, I have a piece of plywood in the back of my truck, and I'm afraid my dogs are going to get out, but I will watch the rest of this I'm very interested in it. I don't mean to run out the door, but George, I got to do it. The dogs are going to escape. Okay, so thank you. So I say bring it down. You guys got to get political. It doesn't happen. If we let the city council under its current management continue to run the show, they're going to zone it into heavy industrial. They're going to zone it into light industrial. It's going to happen.
Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative.
I'm sorry, George, but
well,
it's a
I'm trying
political
not
issue.
to use a buzzer.
All right, it's a political issue, though, and if that's negative, I apologize, and thank you very much for doing this. It's a great contribution.
Thank you, Rex.
Thanks, Rex, very much. And one thing I'll say on that comment is, you mentioned many different things. One of which is that GP does own most of that property. I actually have a hat I'll pass around, and we can just fill it and we can buy it.
No, we can't. We have to buy it. We have to buy that property. We have to buy it, or it's never going to get cleaned up. And we can buy it if it's zoned open space. That's the whole point I'm making.
Yeah,
It
no, I
doesn't
think
take passing a hat. It takes the political will to zone it open space, and $40 billion has been invested on the coastal communities to preserve open space. We don't have to pass the hat, John. We have to become political, and we have to fight the city council. We have to make sure that it's zoned open space and forget this haphazard zone.
Thank you, Rex.
Sherry Wachtel, a local young person. So,
Thank you, welcome.
the same place Trump's tax returns are at. Two things I just want to put out to keep in consideration in your mind. First one is more of a mechanical planning consideration, which is bike access. Ensuring that we remember to have biking access in these areas we're looking to, have for people to explore and be out there. Because a lot of people love bikes, especially around here. The second thing is more of just consideration when you're thinking about, there's consideration in your, how you think about doing all this, and that is, we're intending to attract other young people, right? We're not intending to attract the, no offense, older people. But with attracting young people, both not only as visitors, but if we're really intending for a college, just to remember to go through remember the process that low-income housing, because the home prices will rise up here. They will, places will be worth a lot more, and to just remember that you do need young people to do all this stuff anyway to make it even worth it at all. So, yeah.
So I would like to say that College of the Redwoods, before they started closing down the college campus, which was then taken over by Mendocino College, had an amazing marine technology science program developed and run by Greg Grantham, and it really was, I taught at community college for 13 years, so I know just how forward-thinking and radical that whole program was, and they actually did advertise about the program because it was one of a kind in the nation, and there were people who moved here, students who moved here in order to attend that program, and I absolutely agree that if there's student housing or some way to accommodate those people, they'll come here, they'll get whatever their education is that's needed, and some of them will choose to stay here. But my experience with the Music Together program is I see families come in, so obviously they're young, they've got young kids, and often they're living on a cabin on their parents' property because they can't afford to buy a place. So I definitely
we want access. We want these people we don't want these people living on cabins out on Simpson Lane. We want people living in.
Right.
Well, we want complexes. I know it sounds kind of weird to think about when you start bringing up, housing complexes, but we want young people in town.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adele Horn, and I really liked this theme about healing and thinking about this potential of the land for healing the land. And it made me think about the displacement of the Pomo people and that connection to that site. And I wondered if there have been discussions about addressing that as part of the future of the mill site.
The answer is absolutely, and I was talking to one of their environmental officers yesterday, Ariana, and I don't see him here, but there was one person who's part of the environmental department of the Sherwood Valley Band of Pomo, and they were thinking of coming to this meeting. They're very supportive thus far with of the work that we are doing, and they want to work with us closely. And they attended a symposium that happened recently at the Casper Community Center. And absolutely. And as a matter of fact, you know, it has to have very, very close cooperation and approval, because they have what's called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the city. And they have the right and pursue this pretty diligently. Whenever anything happens out there, they have an observer, and they're looking at, and this is more of a kind of just a first step. This is just the basics. I'm not saying this sufficiently answers your question at all, but I think that it is really a part of what makes this other approach. You know, over at the Grace Hudson Museum, they've done a tiny version of restoring natural native plants, and we've talked with them to some degree about the idea of, you know, with daylight, they love the idea of daylighted creeks. Now, it's just an idea. We don't have the money for that yet. That's not all in place yet. No promises in this regard. But I think it's a good idea. And they really support that idea for exactly these reasons. There are a number of issues there, though, that are very complex. And so I don't want to...
I'll also add to that briefly.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's really important to understand too that they have a very visionary and ambitious program that's forward-looking, that embraces the past, looking towards the future, and it's a citizen science program for the whole Headlands, and so being able to track what's going on with the toxins, or maybe experiment with different things and monitor it. And there's a great interview with them on KZYX that you can Google and find out more about that. And if you're interested, contact them directly. So you know, again, that whole idea of teamwork and consortium, and you know, Bill's list of all the people that could be engaged, it's not exclusive. And so again, we have such a rich potential here as a community to work as a team and do the best things.
And don't miss the handout. We have a one-page handout that has contact information, and you can sign up for online, and you can ask a question there, and we will answer it for you.
My time's up already?
You know, so,
Holy cow!
So what we're going to do is we'll have
Sorry,
one more
John.
comment, and then we'll have one more comment and response, and then we'll have the final closing word, and then.
Well, I will be brief, okay? I won't.
Well, no.
And my dogs are
Don't
away
rush
already,
yourself.
So. I wanted to thank you guys for bringing this together. This kind of shows our community what happens when high-level members have an interest and they do their homework and do their due diligence. It's been a long time since I've sat through a 100+ slide presentation and survived. So. Anyway, yeah, the community has come out for this. This is obviously something that we care about. There's many council meetings that have way less people than this, so this is obviously something that's important. Wise growth, wise planning was a term that I heard. I think that that's a really sensible approach. As much as I would like the whole world to be open space, there's not a whole lot of practicality in that, but how can we plan accordingly so we can try to make everything fit. And one of the things that I think that we need to do as a community is re-examine our land use codes that are pretty outdated and archaic. And if we want to promote open space, I think we also need to promote density where we're allowing to build. And that's something that we really need to visit. Yeah. Because when you encourage sprawl, you have open space, but it's between buildings. Right. And where do we want our open space? We want it, where we can all enjoy it. It's hard to enjoy open space between structures, right? So I think one thing that this group should, try to champion along with, promoting open space is where there is going to be development, because we've got a company that wants to sell their real estate. We've got people that are wanting to develop it. It's going to be hard to stop all of that. But through density, re-examining our building heights, our floor area ratios. This is something that I know the council has taken a look at recently, and they've been open to some dialogue with it. So that's something you guys might want to, put together in the package as you bring this forward. All right?
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm Susan Nutter. I have one quick question regarding the skunk purchase. They were pushing to have a hotel right up with ocean views, and you're talking about the green belt. How permanent or how definite is that hotel planning?
I think the hotel planning is definitely part of their financial feasibility. I really do think that is going to happen. However, in bringing in the consultant to talk about the wildlife corridor, we were looking at the map that I had put up, which is a city council map from June, that shows some of that wildlife corridor, and they were discussing mixed use, and which I discourage. But we also talked about bluff erosion and the fact that the coastal trail may well be taken by the ocean sooner rather than later. And so I think those are all things that they're thinking about, but I think the hotel is really part of what makes it financially feasible for them. So.
But the location is not fixed.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
the location is not
Can be
fixed.
moved back
No.
away from.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
the hotel's not going to be right up to the ocean
Okay.
bluffs, definitely not. And they do have moderate density housing, and they have housing elements as well, which we talked about, because when you have houses, then you have domestic animals, which affect wildlife. You have the lights and so on. And actually Chris Hart was talking about, well, maybe it needs to be a homeowners association in which there are tighter regulations around those kinds of things. So that's all, on the 21st is when the skunk train and harvest market will have an opportunity to share their vision for the properties that they have purchased. So
Where will that be? An open public meeting?
that's here on Saturday, September 21st
9 a.m.
at 9 a.m. And those meetings often go well past lunch. So we have some very hardy city council members that sit through those.
Sue, nothing has been rezoned yet.
Yeah.
You understand that it is a process nothing has been rezoned.
that was
So
my-
they show these maps,
Yeah.
but it's all timber light industrial, is that more or less?
Yeah, that's
Forest
right.
light, yeah, most of it, yeah.
So there is some control there. Thank you all for what you've been doing. I've been advocating for the pond cleanup of the toxins even before the sea level rise argument, and I thank you for it. And furthermore, a week from Friday, we're going to have the global climate strike out here in front of Town Hall. It's going to be all over the world, actually. So I encourage you to come 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Friday, the 20th here in front of Town Hall, yeah. Please come.
Yeah, and along those lines too, the mapping resource that we made is a great resource for you to answer those questions. We also made it with the City Council and Planning Commissioners in mind too. They're welcome to use this at any point in time. But you can see, there is what the land looks like right now. The current coastal trail land is this light green area. Doug Kern's vision map had a buffer that went from here. You can actually use the measuring tool. It's 350 feet width there. The City Council has, at this point, resolved for this buffer to be at least 150 feet. And but what's been fantastic about meeting with the Harts and Robert Pinoli is that they have a really vested interest in this community as well. And so, they've met with me. I've had a chance to walk out there with them and They met with Leslie, and so it's a fluid thing. They want this wildlife corridor to work, and so it's an ongoing dialogue. It's a teamwork thing, but it's really important to recognize how small 150 feet really is on this. So.
And the Coast Commission is going to have something to say about how much they envision coastal erosion and what the wildlife corridor width should be, where setbacks should be, and all of that. So they may be the final arbitrator of how this all comes about.
Mm-hmm. That's right. 21st.
21st, Saturday the 21st.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's, the city council invited those landowners to present their ideas because this is an unusual situation. Usually a place is zoned and a developer buys it with the intent to develop it the way in which it's zoned. And here it's mostly zoned light industrial, and there's all kinds of decisions being made about, well, what could go where and how might it be zoned. And so in some ways it's like, how do you do that without the developer having undue influence? Because as I've said, there could be a real land rush out there where somebody decides to buy a lot of land that's not under deed restrictions, and then basically say, well, if you don't zone it the way I want, then it's taking my land. But really, anyone that buys it's on speculation, because
I don't
it's
think
not-
the takings argument
it's
is
not
really
zoned.
relevant yet,
Yeah.
because we haven't changed the zoning.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer.
That's right. Yep, that's right. Okay, so we'll have a closing comment here, and just making sure there's no other burning questions. Good. So yeah, I think the most important closing comment is that this is a fluid dialogue, and your voice is really important. And the city council members and planning commissioners I've talked to appreciate public comment, well thought out comment, and respectful comment. And so we are a team. It was just fantastic to see so many of the council members and commissioners here tonight, and the packed house. And so please do take the time. I'll actually add one or two more slides at the very end of this with just some emails and addresses if you don't know your addresses of your city council members. And the planning commission has just a single address, and staff will send it all to them. And then also the DTSC, the Department of Toxic Controlled Substances, that's the state watchdog over the whole GP process. They need to hear from you as well too, because there's a really important clause in that whole dialogue. Is there community support for the cleanup? And I forget exactly the wording of it, but it's along those lines. So make sure that you do send them that email. And so what we're going to do is we'll have a break now, and we'll have a chance to just chat amongst ourselves. And once I've had a chance to say hi to everybody that wants to say hi to me, or 15 minutes, whichever sooner, I will give a little bit more of a demo of the mapping project for whoever wants to see it, and a few of the slides. Otherwise, there has been a request if we can amass the time and energy to give a more thorough workshop of the slides at a future date. So we'll fundraise for that and keep you posted on that. So do you guys have any other closing comments?
I just want to thank everybody for coming, and then we'll post this PowerPoint on our website. Did you say that, or?
I wasn't clear about where to post it yet, so yeah, we'll definitely post it on the website.
I think we should.
I'll post it on my Twitter feed as well, because that's public, and I can get that up quickly.
Yep.
And it will be on the Mendocino TV website as well.
That's right.
And Terry, thank you so
Thank you
much
so much,
for
Terry. Yeah.
taping this and getting the document together.
Yep.
Thank you all for coming, and we're not necessarily shutting the lights off, but we think a break is appropriate, and if people need to leave, and then John is happy to, is that right? I did see the family just arrived, John, so I'm not sure.
I believe I do have that ability, and thanks again for the mayor and the city council for inviting us,
Thank
for
you all.
city staff for facilitating this, so thank you all.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.